So there I was, on what I thought would be an ordinary Friday evening. My sister and her husband had left town for a wedding, leaving me in charge of my niece, Maya. The plan was simple: pizza, cartoons, a bit of playtime, and then tuck her into bed. Easy, right? At least, that's what I thought as I pulled into their driveway, the sun setting behind the house casting long shadows across the lawn. I rang the doorbell, and Maya, with her endless energy, greeted me with a squeal and a hug that almost knocked me over. "Uncle Alex is here," she cheered, pulling me inside. The house, usually lively and bright, felt different that evening. Maybe it was the way the shadows seemed to cling a little longer in the corners, or how the fading light from the windows stretched across the floors, creating patterns that looked, if only for a moment, like grasping hands. We started with pizza, her giggles filling the room, a sound that seemed to push away the creeping unease I felt. As dusk turned into night, we settled down to watch her favorite cartoon, something about space rangers and intergalactic adventures. But as the night grew deeper, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. It wasn't anything I could put my finger on, just a whisper of movement caught in the corner of my eye, a faint creak of the floorboards from the other room, when I knew we were both sitting still. Trying to brush it off, I focused on Maya, who was oblivious to my growing discomfort, her eyes glued to the screen. When the show ended, and it was time for bed, she protested, as I knew she would, begging for just one more episode. I stood firm, though, leading her up the stairs to her room, the hallway darker than I remembered. Each shadow seemed deeper, every noise amplified in the silence that followed our footsteps. As I tucked her into bed, the room felt colder, the air almost too still. I read her a story, her choice, something about a magical forest and talking animals. But even as I read the words, my attention was drawn to the window. The curtains fluttered slightly, though there was no breeze, and for a moment, I thought I saw a pair of eyes, wide and unblinking, staring back at me from the darkness outside. That's when she mentioned him, almost casually, as if he were a regular part of her nightly routine. "Mr. Googly Eyes watches over me when it's dark," she said, her voice a mix of comfort and matter-of-factness that sent a chill down my spine. "Who's Mr. Googly Eyes?" I managed to ask, trying to keep my voice light, though my heart raced at the thought of those eyes at the window. "Just my friend. He keeps the other shadows away," she replied, snuggling into her blankets. As I turned off the light, leaving only a faint nightlight to cast a gentle glow, I couldn't help but feel a sense of dread. What had started as a simple evening of babysitting was quickly turning into something far more unsettling. Little did I know, it was only going to get worse from there. After the strange unease of tucking Maya into bed, I couldn't shake off the feeling of being watched. It lingered as I made my way back downstairs, the house's usual warmth now replaced by a cool, unsettling silence. Each step seemed to echo, as if the house itself was listening, holding its breath along with me. Settling onto the couch, I tried to distract myself with my phone, scrolling through endless feeds, but the light from the screen only seemed to carve deeper shadows into the corners of the room. That's when Maya called out for me, her voice tinged with sleep and fear. I rushed back upstairs, finding her sitting upright in bed, her small hands clutching the blanket to her chin. "Uncle Alex, can you check under the bed for monsters?" she whispered, her eyes wide with fear. Humoring her, I knelt down, expecting to find nothing but dust bunnies and forgotten toys. Instead, a cold draft brushed against my face, as if the floorboards themselves exhaled a breath I couldn't see. "Nothing here, Maya," I said, trying to mask the unease in my voice. "You're safe, I promise." "But what about Mr. Googly Eyes? Will he keep me safe too?" Her question caught me off guard, a shiver running down my spine. "Mr. Googly Eyes is your friend, right? He'll watch over you," I reassured her, though the thought offered me no comfort. She nodded, finally lying back down, pulling the covers up to her nose. "He keeps the bad shadows away, but you have to be nice to him, or else..." "Or else what?" I asked, the words barely escaping my lips. She yawned, her eyelids fluttering closed. "Or else he watches you instead." Leaving her room, I couldn't help but glance back at the shadows, half expecting to see something moving in the dim light. The house felt alive, charged with a silent, waiting energy. As I made my way back to the living room, the air felt heavier, as if charged with static, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. I tried to settle down on the couch, but the darkness seemed denser, almost suffocating. I strained my ears, listening for any sound out of place. The house creaked and settled, whispering secrets in a language I couldn't understand. The mention of Mr. Googly Eyes had unsettled me more than I wanted to admit. Was it just a child's imagination? Or was there something more? Something lurking in the depths of the house, watching, waiting. With every shadow that flickered, every light that seemed to dim on its own, the story of Mr. Googly Eyes grew from a simple tale to a haunting presence. I laughed at myself for being spooked by a child's words, but the laughter sounded hollow, eaten up by the enveloping darkness. Trying to shake off the feeling, I reminded myself it was just an old house, its noises and quirks nothing more than the result of settling foundations and my overactive imagination. Yet, as I finally drifted into an uneasy sleep, I couldn't shake the feeling of unseen eyes fixed upon me, watching from the shadows, waiting in the silence. Lying there on the couch, sleep proved elusive. My mind replayed Maya's words about Mr. Googly Eyes, turning them over, looking for logic in a child's fantasy. But logic was a faint beacon in the growing fog of unease that filled the house. I tried to convince myself it was all just the product of an overactive imagination, Maya's and my own. Yet the house seemed to disagree, almost as if it relished in the growing tension. As the clock ticked past midnight, the normalcy of the evening unraveled further. The silence of the house was oppressive, a dense, heavy cloak that seemed to smother every rational thought. My phone, previously a source of distraction, now lay forgotten beside me, its glow too feeble to challenge the shadows that danced just beyond its reach. It started with a sound, so faint I thought I'd imagined it. A soft, dragging noise, like cloth over wood. Rational explanations raced through my mind. Maybe it was the house settling, or perhaps Maya, half asleep, moving in her bed. I listened intently, but the sound didn't repeat. Instead, the silence returned, thicker, more tangible than before. The stillness was abruptly shattered by a creak from upstairs, a sound too deliberate, too laden with intent to be the house settling. My heart skipped a beat. Maya. My mind flashed with concern for her safety, propelling me off the couch. I paused, listening, but there was no follow-up, no sound of a child in distress, only the mocking quiet. I forced myself to sit back down, chiding myself for being spooked so easily. Yet, the ambiance of the house had shifted irrevocably from homely to sinister. Shadows seemed to pulse with a life of their own, stretching and retracting like the breath of a sleeping giant. The air grew colder, a chill that seeped into my bones, making me shiver. Then came the feeling of being watched. It crept up slowly, the unmistakable sensation of eyes fixed upon me, heavy with an intensity that turned my blood to ice. I scanned the room, but saw nothing. Still, the feeling persisted, an uninvited presence that made the room feel crowded. Attempting to reclaim some sense of normalcy, I decided to check on Maya. The trip upstairs was a journey through a landscape transformed. Each step on the staircase felt like a trespass, each shadow a potential hiding spot for unseen watchers. Maya's door was slightly ajar, as I had left it, the sliver of light from her nightlight casting long, twisted shadows across the floor. She was asleep, peaceful and oblivious to the oppressive atmosphere that had taken hold of her home. Relief washed over me at the sight, a brief respite from the gnawing dread. But as I turned to leave, a quick movement caught my eye. A shadow darker than the rest flitted across the wall. There was no source, no logical explanation. It was as if the darkness itself had moved. Returning to the couch, The feeling of being watched intensified, now accompanied by a growing sense of dread. The darkness felt alive, animated by a will that was not benevolent. I tried to convince myself to sleep, to escape the growing fear, but sleep was a sanctuary that remained painfully out of reach. The night stretched on, each minute an eternity, each sound a harbinger of unseen horrors. The boundary between reality and nightmare blurred, leaving me adrift in a sea of fear and anticipation. What had begun as a simple act of babysitting had spiraled into a night of unrelenting terror, with the ominous presence of Mr. Googly Eyes at its heart. The sense of being watched had now morphed into an undeniable certainty. The darkness around me felt charged, as if electrified by the presence of something unseen. My attempts to rationalize the increasingly strange occurrences of the night fell short, crumbling against the sheer weight of my growing fear. The house, once a familiar and welcoming space, had transformed into a labyrinth of shadows and unsettling sounds. I tried to focus on the logical, the explainable. I told myself the house was old, its bones set in their ways, creaking and groaning with the natural shift and settle of time. But logic did little to soothe the prickling at the back of my neck, the feeling of eyes boring into me from the shadows. It was a predatory gaze, one that watched, waited, and seemed to understand my growing unease. The soft, dragging sound returned, clearer now, impossible to dismiss as mere imagination. It was the sound of something moving with deliberation, with purpose. It seemed to circle the room, never visible but always felt. A specter just out of sight. My heart raced, each beat a drum of impending doom echoing through my chest. In a moment of desperation, I flicked on the lamp beside the couch, flooding the room with light. The shadows receded reluctantly, banished to the corners, but the relief was temporary. The light felt like a beacon, attracting rather than repelling whatever watched from the darkness. The air grew colder still, a chill that seeped into my very bones, a physical manifestation of the fear that gripped me. Then silence, a heavy, oppressive silence that seemed to muffle even the sound of my own breathing. It was the calm before a storm, a charged moment where time itself seemed to hold its breath. And in that silence it appeared. At first it was just a shape, a darker patch of shadow that seemed to solidify before my eyes. But as I watched, frozen in terror, it took on form. A figure, tall and impossibly thin, with elongated limbs that seemed to twist and bend in ways that defied anatomy. But it was the eyes that held me captive, large and bulging. They gleamed with an unnatural light, fixing me with a stare that was both curious and malevolent. I couldn't move, couldn't scream, could barely even breathe. The figure, Mr. Googly Eyes as Maya had innocently named it, moved closer, its form wavering slightly as if made of smoke. It was both there and not there, a creature of shadow and fear made manifest. The air around it seemed to shimmer, the very fabric of reality bending in its presence. It stopped, mere inches from me, and we stared at each other, predator and prey, locked in a moment outside of time. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, it faded, dissolving into the darkness from which it had emerged, leaving no trace of its existence, save for the icy fear that gripped my heart. The lamp flickered, a stutter in the flow of electricity, and then steadied, the only evidence of the encounter the rapid beating of my heart and the cold sweat that drenched my body. I was left to question if what I had seen was real or a product of my own terror. But the truth lay in the unshakable feeling of dread that lingered, a silent witness to the reality of the encounter. The night was far from over, and the darkness seemed to press closer, as if emboldened by the creature's visit. The shadows whispered of unseen horrors yet to come, and I knew then that sleep would be an impossible luxury on this longest of nights. As the first rays of dawn broke through the curtains, casting a gentle light that seemed to banish the darkness to the corners, I found myself still awake, a sentinel amid the remnants of the night's terror. The encounter with Mr. Googly Eyes, whether a figment of my imagination or a visitation from some unfathomable otherness, had drained me of both energy and peace of mind. The house, now bathed in the soft glow of morning, felt like a stage after the final act of a play, silent and empty, save for the echoes of what had transpired. Maya, blissfully unaware of the night's events, greeted the morning with her usual vibrancy, her laughter a balm to my frayed nerves. Yet, beneath her cheerfulness, I detected a change. When she mentioned needing a nightlight, so Mr. Googly Eyes can watch over Uncle Alex too, it was with a seriousness that belied her years. The innocence with which she accepted the presence of this unseen guardian was both comforting and chilling. Had her youthful openness allowed her to perceive something I could only glimpse through the veil of fear and disbelief? The house, in daylight, seemed to mock my nocturnal fears. The shadows that had teemed with lurking dread now appeared benign, the ordinary play of light and darkness. But the memory of that fear, the visceral terror of the night, was indelible. It clung to me like a second skin, a constant reminder that reality was perhaps more malleable, more mysterious than I had ever allowed myself to believe. In the aftermath, I found myself caught between two worlds, the rational, daylight world of the mundane and the shadowy realm of the night, where the impossible seemed all too real. The experience had opened a door within me, a portal to a place where the monsters of childhood tales and the entities of folklore dwelled. Closing that door was not an option. The encounter had changed me, altered the fabric of my understanding in ways I could not fully comprehend. Leaving my sister's house that day, I carried with me not just the memory of a terrifying encounter, but a profound sense of unease. Maya's parting words, a mix of affection and ominous warning, echoed in my mind. "Mr. Googly Eyes likes you, Uncle Alex. He's going to watch over you now." The sentiment, meant to comfort, instead sent shivers down my spine. What did it mean to be watched over by such a creature? Was I now under the gaze of an entity beyond my understanding, a guardian from the shadows, or a harbinger of unseen dangers? The experience at my sister's house remains a vivid, unsettling memory. It's a story that I share with hesitance, a testament to the night when the boundaries between belief and skepticism, light and darkness, were irrevocably blurred. If you've ever felt the prickle of being watched, the sudden chill of an unseen presence, remember, the world is vast, filled with mysteries that defy explanation. Keep a light on, keep an open mind. But most importantly, be wary of the shadows, for you never know who might be watching from within their depths. The encounter with Mr. Googly Eyes, if that's what it truly was, left me paralyzed, a statue of fear on the couch. The minutes ticked by like hours, each second stretching out as I struggled to process what had just happened. My mind raced, trying to find a rational explanation. But the reality of what I had seen, what I had felt, defied logic. The shadows of the house seemed to pulsate with a malevolent energy, as if the encounter had awakened something ancient, something dark. I attempted to convince myself it was a trick of the mind, a hallucination born from fatigue and the power of suggestion. Yet, the vividness of the figure, its ghastly eyes that had seemed to peer into the very depths of my soul, was undeniable. The room felt colder now, the air thick with an unspoken threat. The silence was oppressive, punctuated only by the occasional creak and groan of the house settling, each sound a reminder of my vulnerability. The need to act, to do something, anything, became overwhelming. I stood up, my legs shaky, and paced the room, trying to shake off the lingering terror. Every shadow seemed suspect, every corner a potential hiding spot for the figure. The light from the lamp felt feeble, a weak barrier against the encroaching darkness. Determined to dispel the fear, I decided to check on Maya again, needing the reassurance that she was safe, untouched by the night's horrors. The walk to her room felt like a journey through a gauntlet, each step fraught with imagined dangers lurking just out of sight. Her door was slightly ajar, just as I had left it, the sliver of light from the nightlight spilling into the hallway. Peering inside, I saw her sleeping peacefully, a stark contrast to the turmoil inside me. The sight offered a measure of comfort, a reminder of what was real. tangible. But as I turned to leave, a shadow darted across the wall, quick and fluid. I whipped around, heart pounding, but there was nothing there. Just the steady, innocent rise and fall of Maya's chest as she slept. Returning to the living room, the fear had not subsided, but it had changed. It was no longer a paralyzing terror, but a simmering dread, a constant companion in the dark. I realized then that the encounter had shifted something inside me, a fundamental understanding of the world and its unseen corners. The rest of the night passed in a haze of fear and vigilance. Every sound seemed amplified, every shadow a potential threat. The figure did not reappear, but its presence was felt, a specter haunting the edges of my perception. As dawn approached, the shadows retreated, and the oppressive atmosphere lifted slightly, but the relief was superficial. Morning found me exhausted physically and emotionally, a shell of my former self. The encounter with Mr. Googly Eyes had left an indelible mark, a crack in the veneer of the ordinary through which the extraordinary had briefly surged. The house in the light of day seemed ordinary once more, but the memory of the night's events lingered, a reminder of the darkness that lay just beyond the reach of the light.